Welcome back to the Art and Skill of Coaching podcast, where I teach you how to coach. So we are continuing the Master Coach series, celebrating 200 episodes on the podcast, and today is jam-packed. We're diving into the 7 coaching mistakes that you are unintentionally making that are probably keeping your clients stuck. And here's the thing. Most coaches think they're helping, but the intention does not override the impact, which is what we kicked off this series talking about last week. And because this field has a low barrier to entry and very little in terms of standardized training, a lot of well-meaning coaches end up using tools that work great as a friend, but fall flat and even backfire when you're in the role of coach. So we're talking about it today. So mistake number 1 is acting like a cheerleader instead of a coach. Ouch, but it's true. Listen, validation matters and celebration is important, but over celebrating can quickly turn into cheerleading. And your client doesn't need a cheerleader, they need a coach. Now, I do start every session with about 1 to 2 minutes of celebrations, especially with my clients who are ambitious and high achievers, who chronically overlook what's going well or take moments to acknowledge their strengths and skill sets. But that's it, 1 to 2 minutes, not 20. And inside of ASC, I actually audit coaching sessions. And this is why I'm talking about this, because I see it a lot. Spending half of the session reviewing homework and cheering the client on. And if you're doing that, that's okay. Don't judge yourself, but cut it short. Because your client is paying you to help them change their lives, not gas them up. That's why they have friends, okay? Be aware of the trap of having them feel good, but not actually changing. I could get on a soapbox with that one. That's why I kicked off the podcast episode with it. But let's go ahead and dive into mistake number 2, which is asking questions with no real direction. I call this the Curious George syndrome. Questions for the sake of questions. Your questions must be deeper than just curiosity and gathering information. They should be intentional and they should move a client deeper and forward, not just information gathering where you're going deeper and deeper and deeper with no plan or no integration, and not just forward super fast without pausing to understand the pattern and building client awareness. Masterful coaching really uses this process of 1 step deep, 1 step forward, 1 step deep, 1 step forward, that rhythm. So that way you have enough depth to actually surface insight and enough forward movement to create momentum. Coaching requires both that exploration and that direction at the same time. One is not better than the other. You need both simultaneously. So make sure when you're asking questions, you're not just asking to ask and gather information. You have some type of direction without leading the client. Here's mistake number 3. It's coaching the symptom instead of the system. I touched on this on last week's episode, but let's go a little bit deeper here. Most behaviors don't happen in isolation, and your coaching shouldn't happen in a vacuum either. There's almost always some intricate system, whether it's internal or external, that's driving the client's behavior or lack thereof. And when we can look hard enough, we're usually able to identify habits and patterns that the client might not be able to report because of a psychological blind spot, embarrassment, shame, etc. And what I've noticed is that a lot of new coaches will often jump straight into action planning, straight into problem solving. Just change this, try that instead. This is what worked for me. This is what I heard on a podcast. Let's try that. But again, without taking the time to actually accurately assess the system, not just identify and point out and change the symptom, you're putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. So you actually want to slow down, you want to assess, you want to find the pattern, then intervene. Which takes me to step number 4, which is kind of similar, and that's missing the underlying safety strategy beneath the behavior. So like I said, this builds on the last point, but before you coach on a behavior, you need to understand the need under the behavior or the safety strategy fueling that behavior, especially when it's out of alignment with what the client says they want. So as the coach, you really want to think and you want to ask the client, what value is being violated when you act in that way? And in those moments when you choose or just act impulsively, what need is being met or protected in those moments? Clients will often take actions that contradict their goals or violate their values, not because they're lazy or because they're mindless or impulsive. It's because that behavior most likely is meeting a deeper need. And a lot of times it's subconscious and or memorized. So maybe it's a need like stability or connection or predictability. And if you're missing that, your coaching's going to fall flat because you cannot coach at levels 4 and 5 of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a psychological theory that's really important to understand as a coach. And I'll actually attach an article in the show notes to learn more about this because I think it's super important because coaching is a higher level psychological need of self-actualization and purpose and meaning. But if your client's basic needs are at risk, aren't being met or there's a perceived threat to them, they're not going to be super coachable in those moments. And assessing this and incorporating it is actually where sustainability and real change comes from. So let's go ahead and shift gears and start talking about mistake number 5 that I see that unintentionally keeps your clients stuck, and that's prioritizing rapport over leadership. I've said this before, and it's because it's important. You're their coach, not their friend. I'm not saying that you don't have a relationship with them, but they have friends. They are hiring you as a professional, as a coach. Rapport is critical. Rapport is part of that, but rapport is deeper than being liked. Translating that rapport as the foundation into a professional relationship where there's leadership and influence and respect requires creating safety, influence, trust, and boundaries. And building this actually takes skill. It doesn't just happen. And if you're the type of coach that thinks, oh, some of my clients work really well with me and other ones don't, maybe it's time to look in the mirror and see, where are you lacking here? Because coaches that are masterful at this, they can create it in a session and they can create it with every single client. This is how you know this is an area of improvement for you, is if you experience any of these things that show up because of a lack of professional rapport and definitely a lack of leadership. If you're experiencing chronic no-shows, if you're experiencing last minute or late cancellations, missed payments, clients being inappropriate and violating boundaries and texting you nonstop, maybe on your personal line, and if you're getting ghosted, this isn't a client problem, it's a coach leadership problem. It is very important to set healthy boundaries and expectations and be in leadership when you're coaching. I'm not saying you can't be friendly, and I'm not saying you want to skip rapport and engage in this power dynamic, but I am saying rapport is the foundation and it's your job to build leadership, and that there are real consequences when this is lacking. So that's mistake number 5. Let's talk about number 6, and it's coaching when the client is dysregulated. What does that mean? When a client is flooded, when they are crying or upset or pressured for speech or under stress, their nervous system's dysregulated, it means their brain's dysregulated too. They're not thinking the right way. And coaching is a higher level need. And if your client is flooded and anxious and revved up or shut down or activated, they're not going to be able to access the parts of their brain that are required for deep insight or awareness or complex problem solving. They literally aren't in the right part of their brain or body. But new coaches, I've noticed at least, especially in our audits and just being in the industry for the last 15 years, is they feel this pressure to quote unquote fix the client in that moment. It's so uncomfortable. They feel the pressure and urgency to make them feel better, and they want to feel better because they feel uncomfortable with the client's reaction. So they ask questions to jump into problem solving, like, what do you want to do about this? How are we going to handle it? Or they give advice or tell them what to do prematurely, but the answer isn't going to be accessible, and they're not going to be receptive to any advice or problem solving until they're regulated. And sometimes the most powerful coaching in these moments, even though it might not be the sexiest, is to actually pause. It's to slow down, it's to regulate, it's to build tolerance and create safety. I'm not saying you want to do that all the time. And if a client is flooded every session, 1, they might not be appropriate for coaching. And 2, maybe we need to focus on skill development. But when a client feels safe and they're regulated, then the insight will come naturally. And in this industry, unfortunately, I still do think there's like a little bit of residue around this, like go harder, go faster, pick yourself up from the bootstraps, get it done. And that is important sometimes, but when the coaching is just as forceful and judgmental and matches the pace of everyday life, it's going to be less effective. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up and help the client build the tolerance around that discomfort and build the skill set to be able to regulate so that you can coach them and they're able to actually integrate all of the goodness that's coming through in those sessions. Let's talk about mistake number 7 that I see. And it's my last one for you today, but it's not the last one that's happening in the industry. And it's being coach-centered versus client-centered. All right, this one might hurt, but I'm talking about it because I don't think it's talked about enough, but clients absolutely experience it, and it is very hurtful to the coaching relationship. So what we're talking about here when we talk about being coach-centered versus client-centered is the coach's ego and any unintentional projection. I am actually going to attach 2 entire podcast episodes on just this topic. And I dive deep on those podcast episodes around the shadow side of caring and 5 ways that you're probably projecting your coaching. I go into depth. I explain the science. I define what it is, how you know you're doing it, and I give an antidote to each. So definitely check those podcast episodes. But let's cover this really briefly here as mistake number 7. This happens being coach-centered versus client-centered when you care so intensely about the client that you start steering instead of supporting, that you become so enmeshed with them and their results and what it means about you that you project. And if you're still unsure if this is you, coach-centered coaching looks like leading questions that get them to your conclusion or asking them the same question just a different way over and over again until they give an answer that you like or think is right. Asking for details that you don't actually need, rushing because you want the session to look good or you want them to get a result or you want it to get somewhere so that you feel effective, so that you feel worthy, and you make the session about your performance instead of their process. I know that this is an uncomfortable topic, but it's very important, and awareness is step one. And so understanding what this is and why it might be happening, and then if you're doing it, knowing what to do. And if this quick call out stings a little, please go listen to those 2 episodes I attached in the show notes. We have over 200 episodes on this podcast, but these 2 are definitely in my top 10 favorite of all time because of how important this topic is and how much of a blind spot it is for coaches and the helpfulness of the antidotes that I offered in those episodes. So again, the link is in the show notes to go check those out. There are obviously more mistakes that coaches unintentionally make that contribute to clients feeling stuck or stagnant or not getting the result that they want, but I really wanted to narrow it down to a couple that I see quite often and give you some antidotes around how to fix these really quickly, because when you can avoid these 7 mistakes, your coaching is going to become cleaner, it's going to become sharper, obviously more effective, more ethical, more sustainable, and dramatically more impactful. Your clients are going to get better results because you're coaching them, not just their symptoms, not just your assumptions, not just your ego. And this is exactly the type of skills that I teach inside of the Art and Skill of Coaching, which is an advanced training program that teaches you the psychology and tangible tools around the practice and skill set of coaching. Because good intentions are important, but they're not enough. Mastery requires training, it requires skill, it requires information, and it requires learning how to see and resolve these blind spots before they cost your clients their progress and you your coaching practice. So if you want to coach at a professional level and want to be the kind of coach that clients stay and renew and refer and get real results, this is your work, and it's equally important to invest in not just your business, but your skill set as well. And if your skill set is ready for an upgrade, enrollment for our spring class is opening soon. There is a link to join the waitlist in the show notes right now. I would encourage you to hop on there so that you can stay up to date on when everything opens and learn how to coach in a way that really creates meaningful, lasting change for your clients. As always, I hope you found today's episode helpful and that you're enjoying this Master Coach series to celebrate 200 episodes on this podcast. Next week, we are continuing with part 3 of our 4-part Master Coach series. But in the meantime, please show some love by sharing this podcast, leaving us a review. Make sure you hit those 5 stars and the subscribe button so that you never miss another training to help you master the art and skill of coaching.